بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So this is our first discussion of the idea or the concept of tazkiyah. And the reason that I wanted to focus on this is because I think it's something that's very fundamental. And I really think that this is one of the lackings in the ummah today. It's something that unfortunately we have very much fallen behind on. And I think a lot of that has to do because of how certain things have been taught, whether it be politically or whether it be otherwise. And I find that, including myself, there was a lot of focus on the outward and a lot of focus on the superficial, and not even on myself. It was a lot of times policing others and looking at what others were doing. And when I was actually exposed to Ghazali, and it was through the Mustasfa, I started reading Ihya. And when I got to Rub al-Muhlikat, I was like, Subhanallah, in this is the cure for a lot of the ailments that we are facing as an ummah today. And I always found it interesting on how there was so much of an introspection that Ghazali is bringing so much of the discussion back to the self and back to the individual, and how much we were so outwardly focused. And subhanallah, I had a brother, he actually came up to me a few days ago. He's like, Sheikh, I saw this person, when we were praying. He said, when you came up from the sajda, you were in the jalsa position, right? You were sitting up from the sajda, and he was still in sajda. And then when he went back into sajda, he got up and then he went to sajda again. He's like, what should I say to him? I was like, nothing. Focus on your prayer, akhi. Like, in subhanallah, and the thing is, like, we've just had this outward focus for so long, and like I said, even within ourselves. And I realized that many times this policing or trying to fix others, a lot of it has to do with our own arrogance, a lot of it has to do with our own shortcomings. And the reality is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says to all of us, "Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nar." All right, he says, save yourselves and your family from the hellfire. And a lot of the focus, even Islamically, is very much internal. If we spent more time focusing on ourselves and correcting ourselves, a lot of the ailments that we face in the ummah, we wouldn't be facing them today. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this a means to really purify our hearts and purify our souls. Ameen. So who was Ghazali? Why is it that we chose this book, and who he was as an individual? And Ghazali it's a very interesting individual. Does anybody know what his laqab was? Anybody know what his nickname was? One of his more famous
Hujjatul
ones?
Islam.
Huh? Not
Hujjatul Islam.
Hujjatul Islam, right? Hujjatul Islam, that he was the sign of Islam, right? Or the criteria of Islam. Like he was a sign that Islam was correct as an individual. And that's a very bold statement. But if you actually go through his works, you really do see that. SubhanAllah, the stance that he took against the Mu'tazila, the stance that he took against philosophers, the positions that he took, even in defining what Islam was and how it was. You don't find anybody addressing these sciences, and the theoretical sciences the way that Ghazali addressed them. And it really was amazing the way he approaches a lot of these things, and how he methodologically, he breaks down a lot of these different things, a lot of these different issues on a number of different levels. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really blessed him with the ability to to really break things down and make them very digestible, make them very understandable. You don't find a lot of like isharat with Ghazali, right? You don't find a lot of things where he'll just leave off or he'll indicate things. He's very precise when he presents things, and he's very precise when he talks about things. And which is one of the reasons that I really enjoy reading him, and one of the reasons that I feel it's very important to actually go back to the Ihya, and go back to his revival of the Islamic sciences. So concerning him as an individual, his father, he died when he was a boy. And his early life was spent in madrasa, where he went from Tus to Jurjan to Naisapur. He was actually born in Tus, right? So that's where he was from, and that's where we find out that he eventually passes away. Allah yarhamu. The interesting here that really stands out is when he was in Naisapur, he studied with Imam al-Juwayni. Imam al-Juwayni was known as Imam al-Haramain, a very, very strong faqih, very, very strong usuli, well known in those sciences. And you can see that Ghazali, he picked up a lot of these things from his sheikh, from his teacher. And when he studied there, he was appointed in the court of Nizam al-Mulk, and who was the ruler at the time. And this is where he gained his initial fame. So you're talking about at a very young time frame. So just imagine, this would be equivalent to our college years. it is during his college years that he, rahimahullah, he became extremely famous, right? Because he just made these connections very quickly. I have a map here in the corner. I don't know if so I have Tus and Nisapur. I have here are highlighted. Jurjan is here closer to the Caspian Sea, right? I mean, so over here, this is no, I'm sorry, Jurjan. Yeah, Jurjan is a little bit closer to the Caspian Sea. I don't think I highlighted it here, but just to give you an idea where everything was, all of the obviously this is all in Iran. He himself was Farsi of origin, which is something that I think we as Muslims should take pride in. How we are one of the few religions that you have people when they're conquered, right? So there's this huge claim, or the people claim, that Islam was spread by the sword. Well, there are two meanings to this, and I think it's important to discuss both of them. Was Islam spread by the sword, meaning that was it spread by coercion? Absolutely not. Nobody was forced to become Muslim. Many people were allowed to stay on religion, whatever religion they were. And was it spread by war? Yes. I mean, and that is something that is very difficult for us, the Muslims, to actually deny. Saying that, I don't think we ask the right questions when it comes to those particular issues. If we say, was Islam spread by war, was it spread by battle, that is something that I'm willing to submit to, and something that I'm willing to accept. I think the better question is what happens to the conquered people? And I think this is sometimes a question that we overlook. So in Islam, if we look that the Persians, they were conquered relatively early, right? They were conquered relatively early, in within the Muslim Empire, and as immediately after they conquered, as soon as these individuals started learning Arabic, and they started speaking Arabic, you had them rising through the ranks, not just politically, right? So I don't think the political importance is as important as having religious significance. It's always been amazing to me how you have an Arab religion now taking leaders of that religion from non-Arabs, and Ghazali being one of them, right? We have a few examples, like if we think about Imam in fiqh, we think of Abu Hanifa, Farsi. If we think Imam in hadith, we think of Imam Bukhari, from Bukhara. If we think Imam in tazkiyah, in tasawwuf, we think Imam al-Ghazali. And not just a high level within our religion. We're talking about imams. Like, these are people who are considered maraja. These are people who are considered, we would go back to be criteria and guidelines for many of our understandings of how we should approach certain disciplines, whether they be fiqh, whether it be hadith, or whether it be tazkiyah. So it's really, like I said, this is something that has always really stood out to me, that there's a conquered people who not just take any role, but they take a very strongly religious role within that particular religion, or within the religion of Islam. So after he became very famous, Imam Ghazali, he actually started having some issues, and these are some of the things that he actually complains about, and one of the things that he actually talks about, saying that he kind of looked around, and he would see these scholars who would be he saw these scholars, and he saw how they were dressed, and he would see them being followed by these entourages. And when he saw that, he started developing this unrest, and he felt that there was something wrong, right? He didn't feel like, okay, this is what Islam actually teaches, and this is what is meant for people of the religion. And because he saw that fame, and because he started having this unrest in his heart, he actually left that. He left that entire lifestyle, and he went to Damascus. When he went to Damascus, he actually became a cleaner of one of the masajid. He just started cleaning one of the masajid, and he was relatively unknown, when he was doing that. And while he was cleaning, there was like a class going on, and the teacher asked a question, and none of the students was able to answer. And then Ghazali actually told the answer, right? So he told the answer to one of the students, and the teacher, he said, how did you figure that out? Who told you that answer? And he said, it was actually the sweeper in the masjid. And he said this is not possible that this person is an ordinary sweeper. And then he became, obviously, his fame came back, and this is when he decided to return to Nisapur. But one thing here that I also do want to point out is that during that period of unrest that he had, a lot of people say that he had a crisis of faith. Now, there are two ways that this can actually be looked at: whether he had an actual crisis of faith, and I find that more difficult to digest, because he was still within the circles of knowledge, right? He was still learning, he was still teaching, he was still passionate about the religion. So you really do see that. or did he have a problem with the daliliya, or did he have a problem with epistemology in how it is that you actually formulate proofs? And wallahu alam, it would seem that he had more of an issue with this science on how to actually incorporate and validate particular proofs in order to prove your argument than the problem with Islam in itself. So I don't really believe, wallahu alam, that he had a crisis of faith, but more of a problem with this daliliya and how it is that you establish the proof. Because you have to understand that he died 505, right? So he's still relatively early within the 400s. This was during the period where you had a lot of translations coming in from the Greek philosophers, and this is the thing that a lot of people were trying to achieve, and they're trying to understand, and this is something that they were all competing in. So you had famous people like Farabi, and you had other famous people who were really spreading this idea, or this Greek heterodoxy on how it is that you determine divinity, and how it is that you determine intelligence, how it is that you form arguments. So when you have that Hellenistic paradigm, you had Ghazali himself, who was kind of challenging that, like, okay, is this actually the way to establish proofs? Is this the way to actually establish truths? So I think he had more of a problem with that than he had a problem versus a crisis of faith. Having crisis of faith, I think this is something that is very natural for a lot of people, and not to put him down, rahimahullah, if he did have that. But based on the way he kind of continued his life and the way he was living, I don't feel that that was the actual particular issue. So, in Damascus, like we said, he had this, ascetic period, where he had this like zuhud, this period where he kind of retired, and he continued into Damascus, and he became the sweeper. And during that time, he actually traveled around quite a bit. And it was during that period that he actually started writing the Ihya. It was during that time that he actually started writing about, reviving the Islamic sciences. So you have to understand that he had his formal education was relatively complete after he had studied with Juwaini and stuff in Nisapur, and he himself had started teaching. And then his move into Damascus, where he started delving more into this experiential knowledge, or more into tasawwuf. So after that, and we said, the very famous story where he was called on, that I had mentioned before. He decides to go back to Nisapur. He goes to Nisapur, and then I think the Khalifa at the time, he wanted to appoint him again, and he said, no, I'm good. I don't want to. I don't feel like teaching anymore. I don't feel like being involved in this. So he moved back to his native city of Tus, where he established a school in a khanqa. And khanqa is basically a place where a person goes to meditate. A person goes to kind of be with himself, and be back with Allah. And then that's where rahimahullah, he passed away in his hometown of Tus, and in 505. One of the interesting things here, actually, also to point out, that he was in Damascus before it was sacked, right? So I'm sorry, he was in Jerusalem before it was sacked by the Crusaders. So he didn't actually witness that. He didn't actually have to deal with that. He left before that happened. And he'd already returned back to Nisapur. So this is just, again, a very short summary of the life of Ghazali. There are a number of works that have been written on it. Even Skilly himself, in the translation that we're using, he has a nice introduction where he talks about a lot of Imam Ghazali's life. So about his book, about the Ihya. So there are a number of positive, a number of pros about this book. It deals with the heart, which is something that is extremely, extremely important. It is the heart that all of our actions are based off of, and that is the condition for the acceptance of many of our actions, all of our actions. In the Ihya is a summary of his life experiences. So there's a reason that he wrote this book, and he really poured himself out into this, kind of as a summary of how to bring balance to an individual's life, and how to really balance those superficial acts of worship, with those internal acts of worship, bringing that balance to that. And I think that's something that's really important, not just having the theoretical knowledge, but actually having that experiential knowledge too. It's extremely organized and well presented, and this is one of Ghazali's gifts, that he organizes things very well. He gives a number of examples to kind of reinforce the points that he's trying to make, and this is something that we'll come across time and time again as we continue through the book. One of the bad things about the books is his use of weak and inauthentic hadith, and you find this book is rife with it, right? It's full of hadith. Like, if you see him mentioning a hadith, automatically your antenna should go up and know that, okay, there's probably it's probably weak, or it's probably unfounded. And again, this is not it's not a slight at Ghazali. You cannot be a master of all things, right? It's just not possible. And we have to understand that the man was an usuli, he was a faqih, you know what I mean? In like he had the grasp of the language, he had all these things, but hadith was not something that he was well versed in. And it's not a shortcoming in his part. You can't be versed in everything, right? It's just not possible to be versed in everything. And we find that this is one of the things that he, rahimahullah, was definitely lacking in. So why did he put this this book together? He basically has four parts, right? So every section is called a ruba, or every section is called a quarter. So if you like literally translated all of this, you would say the quarter of worship, the quarter of manners, the quarter of destructive vices, and the quarter of saving virtues. And these four sections are how he divided this book. And the reason that he divided it into these four ways was that he wanted to differentiate between the superficial acts and the internal acts. So you find that the first two arba, or the first two quarters that he actually mentions there, are those superficial actions. So if we go back to the sections again, you have worship and manners, right? So worship is how we deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and manners is how we deal with each other. And these are both, external actions. These are both superficial actions. And destructive vices, right? The things that harm the heart, or the things that take away from the heart. So we'll talk about anger, we'll talk about arrogance, we'll talk about pride, right? These are all the things. And then saving virtues, courage and generosity, and all of these things, these saving virtues. We will talk about those inshallah when we get to them, but we're going to focus more on this third section, which are the destructive vices. So he subdivides that into explaining the heart itself in what it is, right? And that's something, again, that's really, we might take it for granted, be like, okay, we all know what our heart is. But there are reasons that he goes into that, and there are reasons that he describes it the way it is, and it's just to get a better grasp on what the heart is, and how to take control of it, which is the second part, right? So he describing the heart and how to fix it. This is basically what Ghazali is doing in this section, or in this book. So the purpose is to know Allah, and he mentions that what distinguishes us from animals is the ability to know Allah, right? And this is something, again, very fundamental. It's something that's very important, and the reason we have this is the fitrah, right? This natural, innate inclination that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with, is so that we can actually come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first chapter, he talks about four key terms, right? He talks about the soul, he talks about the spirit, he talks about the heart, and he talks about the intelligence. Did you guys pick up anything in your reading on these four things? Anything stand out? So Nazim, you're excused, because I know you didn't get a chance to read. But who else is in here now? I think everybody's here, alhamdulillah.
There are two attendees you may want to promote.
I think I've allowed everyone to speak. Do I have to make everybody a panelist, or?
I don't know.
I guess, yeah.
Okay, I'll just do that.
Something that stood out to me, that is, for each and every thing he gave two explanation.
Okay.
One is the explanation that, he explained them, but that is used usually with the doctors or physicians. And he used another explanation where he actually means throughout the book, when he's talking about the heart.
Yes.
Okay, this is a sado, substance, and that is the definition that I'm going to choose.
Yes. Okay. No, mashallah, absolutely. So he mentions basically two definitions for each of these. What is the thing that really stood out so when he mentions all of these things at the end of the whole section, what does he basically say? What does he say is the fundamental difference between the soul, spirit, heart, and intelligence?
I highlighted here.
So he says, what is it? The nafs, the ruh, the qalb, and the aql. Essentially, does he differentiate them or no? You guys reading or what, man?
I highlighted it somewhere. So
yeah, that's always a good excuse.
I guess everything revolves around the heart.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, basically, so the first three, right? The soul, the spirit, and the heart, he doesn't really differentiate them, right? He says they're all basically the same thing. Even though the terms are different, he says that essentially this is the tool in our body that makes the choice. And what is the role of intelligence?
To process information.
Okay, how does that relate to the soul, the spirit, and the heart? Because that's the one piece that he actually separates. So if we bunch the soul, the spirit, and the heart together, and we actually say that this is one thing, this is that he's going to use this in as one term. Like these are all the same thing to Ghazali in essence. The only thing he separates is the intelligence. So if we're talking about two things here, what is the role of both of these things?
To know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to perceive knowledge.
Okay, good. How do they interact with each other? How does the aql interact? And for simple, like just to make it simple, how does our intelligence interact with our heart? And by heart, I mean our spirit, our soul.
Maybe it's somehow internal and external somehow.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, meaning intelligence is something that has to do with the outer world, and the heart and the spirit and the soul being something related to the internal factors, meaning internal world, or maybe this world or the hereafter.
So
that's why,
no problem. How are they connected?
He says that the outer part is like where you get the real knowledge of things.
Mumtaz.
And then the other one is where like the knowledge actually becomes refined and has quality.
Ahsant, right? So I think both of you touched on something that's really important. The intelligence is actually external perception, right? So the intelligence actually allows me to take and process whatever's outside and brings it in, and it is processed in my heart, right? Because my heart is the one, or is the unit that ultimately makes that decision. So how I deal with all of this superficial world around me, that is through my intelligence, right? It's through my intelligence, it's through my perception. But there's another type of perception that he talks about too, which I find really interesting. And what type of perception is that?
Maybe it's our fitra, maybe it's our innate nature, innate senses that we strive for our Lord, strive for our Master.
Not to cut you off, but inshallah, let's focus on those who read.
Okay.
Next week, inshallah. Who all are here? Who's everyone's supposed to have read? You guys have a lot of time, mashallah, and it wasn't that many pages.
What was the question again, Sheikh?
So the question was that Ghazali, he not only talks about the superficial perception, he talks about another type of perception too. And what is that?
The mukashafa?
Right. So mukashafa is something that we'll get into. So I think mukashafa and ilham and all of these things, that is definitely an internal perception that happens. How that happens, and and when that happens, these are all things that we definitely do need to talk about, and we will get to, inshallah, because I think those are very important. I think one of the problems that we have, and one of the issues that we have with the kashf and the ilham, is that we believe that these are actually states that we should strive for. And when the reality is that kashf and ilham, these are actually gifts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he yahib Allahu man yasha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gifts whoever he wills. So I can do all of these deeds, right? I can do all of this dhikr. I can do all of these good deeds. I can perform all of these actions. Is it necessary that Allah gives me kashf or ilham?
Not necessarily.
It's not necessary. And for me to strive for those things, I believe that's arrogance. Because it is a gift from Allah, and you don't strive for a gift. A gift is something that is given by the will of the one who owns that gift. So, and again, inshallah, we'll talk more about that when we get to that point. But right now, I think these are really important points for us to have. That you have this internal perception and you have this external perception, right? The external perception, even that is taken in internally, and you process it, and then you have this internal perception that is by the heart. And there are certain things that we just feel in our lives, right? There are certain times when we're walking, and our heart will tell us, "Don't go down this road," even though physically we don't see anything. right? If you're walking and you go down the space or you go down a road, and all of a sudden your heart tells you like, don't go down here, right? This is don't go this way. Or your heart will tell you like, you know what, let's choose this way instead. And many times you can't even give like any logical reasoning to why it is that we make certain choices. Those things that is that sense of internal perception, and that is something, again, that is a gift from Allah. So he talks about the heart, and there are a number of different definitions that he brings. The spirit, I actually I really like the example he brings, and I thought that was really interesting. He said that this is our body is our physical body, and our soul is like a lamp, right? And the lamp, our body is like a room, and the soul of the body is like a lamp, and it's the soul that actually enlightens the body. And I really like that. And then he brings the verse وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, that they ask you about the spirit. Say the spirit is part of the Lord's domain. You have only been given a little knowledge. Basically, what he's saying here is anybody who spends a lot of time talking about the ruh is wasting their time. And that's the reason that he brings the verse. Saying that, you have a number of scholars, from them Al-Razi, who spends a lot of time focusing on the ruh, what it is, what it consisted of, what its abilities are. So um, for Ghazali, he was like, okay, no, this is something that's unseen. You shouldn't wait. You shouldn't spend a lot of time on this. But you do have scholars who did spend time with it and who did speak about it, saying that it's always going to be a theoretical discussion, because we don't have any type of there's no experimentation that can be done to actually establish what the reality of the spirit is, because it is something that is of the unseen. For the nafs, I always found this interesting, is that even Ghazali himself mentions that when the Sufis talk about the nafs, they usually focus on the negative aspects of it. So the negative aspects of the nafs is anger and appetence. Appetence is shahwa. Shahwa is like appetence is a good translation for it. Another translation that we're probably more familiar with is a sense of desire, right? To want things. And so he mentions these two faculties, the faculty of anger and the faculty of wanting and the faculty of desire. Even though both of these things, they're usually negative, right? They're usually negative. They can have positive uses, but they're usually negative. And this is the one that many of the Sufis they focus on. And again, he puts it in with the ruh and the qalb, saying that okay, these are all basically the same thing. And when I use these terms, I'm not really going to differentiate between them. He talks about the different souls. And these are the three that are here, and these are mentioned in the Quran. The soul at peace, the self-reproaching soul. The self-reproaching soul is basically the one that is, it always calls itself to account, right? It's always looking at itself, and it's always trying to better itself. And then you have the soul that is fight evil, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from those evil souls. I mean. The intelligence, again, it's an idea of perception and how we deal with the outer world, and how we take in the different senses that we have. And again, that which we know and perceive. This is how you summarize the three, the ruh, the qalb, and the nafs. So why did Ghazali spend so much time discussing these terms? Because he felt many of the scholars confused them, right? He was like, they don't have a good idea of what nafs is. They don't really know what qalb is. They don't really know what the ruh is. So I'm going to break it down for you guys and basically make it easy and clarify it for you. And that's why I'm talking about these things, because you guys just completely confused them and you completely messed it up. And again, this is his practical experience speaking here, right? So when we talk about Ghazali, this is his practical experience speaking here, talking about the problems that he actually faced, in the madrasa system that he was dealing with. And it's really interesting, is that he actually complains about the madrasa system that he was in, saying that all of these scholars, they have this dress, like they have this uniform, and this uniform is one of the things that actually turned me away from them. And subhanallah, I was thinking about his statement. I think he uses the word hashma. He said, like, they have this uniform, and I was thinking, subhanallah, like even in this day and age, there are many people you can look at, and you know exactly what institution they graduated from. And it was kind of scary. I was like, you have Ghazali complaining about this 1,000 years ago. Like literally 1,000 years ago, complaining about the same issues that we have today. Allahu Akbar. You know, how you can actually tell what, you know, what institution these people are from just because of the way they dress. And I believe that you know, it is something that is dangerous, and I can see why Ghazali had such an issue with this. And this actually develops it develops a gap between the scholar and the people, and that is something that's really dangerous, you know, because this idea of having a uniform and differentiating yourself is something that is very anti-prophetic. You know, even when the Bedouin he walked in, you had him say to the you had him say to the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Man minkum Muhammad?" You know, who amongst you is Muhammad? Yeah, meaning that he looked around and he couldn't see anything that really differentiated the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from his companions. And that just should show us the humility, you know, and how humble he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, and how approachable he was as a person, as a character, as an individual, as a being, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that is something we should try to emulate. We shouldn't try to do those things that really make us stand out. We shouldn't try to do those things that differentiate us, because many of those things, they can lead to arrogance, right? They can lead to arrogance, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. So, how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala use the heart in the Quran and Sunnah? And Ghazali, he talks about this. And basically, he says that it is the heart that discerns the reality of things. You know, sometimes you can look at something, or sometimes you perceive something, sometimes you see things that, you know, this is a person telling the truth. Sometimes you can see, like, okay, if the work has been done properly, you know, a mother can sometimes see if, you know, her child is lying. You know, all of these things are discerned by the heart. It's not because you see anything in your eyes or something that you feel in your hands. It's something that, you know, our heart is able to discern. And it really is an amazing power, right? It really is an amazing power that sometimes we overlook, sometimes we take for granted. But it is through this vessel that we're actually able to see the true reality, and it is through this that we are able to draw. And this is why, you know, because it's the tool that discerns the reality, that we're able to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through it. So he talks about the connection between the physical and the spiritual heart, and he says that the spiritual heart is actually seated in the physical heart. And you have a number of narrations that actually indicate that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said al-iman ha huna, you know, and he pointed to his chest, showing that, you know, iman is in the heart. And he said that there is a piece of flesh in the body. If it is sound, then the whole body is sound, and if it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. Ala wa hiya al-qalb, you know, and that verily that portion is the heart. And obviously he's talking about the spiritual heart, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's not talking about, you know, the physical one, but there is a clear connection there between the physical and the spiritual heart. And that pretty much ends chapter 1. Inshallah, next week we'll spend a little bit more time talking about chapter 2. But if there are any questions or comments, or any sections that you guys want to you know, to clarify, or any things that you want to talk about, I mean, I would really suggest you guys taking the material and just underlining things that either are unclear or that really stood out for you, that you feel might be good to share. So I'm done on my end. We've gone about 40 minutes, alhamdulillah. So I'll open up the floor for any questions or any issues that you guys want to discuss. Allahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqi nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
MashaAllah, Sheikh, I like the presentation. Even though I read 4 times, to be honest with you, it felt like I didn't read at all.
Yeah, this helped. I read it like a few weeks ago, and I don't know. I felt it was hard to really understand everything.
No. So the thing is, like, you know, even though his presentation is good, and even though he tries to, you know, he really breaks down things and it's really organized, I think actually being able to sit and get a little bit of guidance into what he's talking about really kind of lets things gel and sit a little bit better. So I hope this cleared up whatever issues you guys had seen. You know, his language is a little bit flowery, you know, so you'll find that he'll go into things a little bit more than that you would imagine. Like you'd think that there's a simpler way to express something, but sometimes it can get a little flowery. But
I was really surprised. I thought it was Yeah, I felt like I was back in ethics class and I was reading, Aristotle or something.
Yeah. So, you know what's really amazing is that he was working within this Hellenistic paradigm, right? So you had all of this translation of all these Greek works, and one of the things that they were actually battling and fighting, what was this idea of like metaphysics? Like how do we deal with metaphysics? Is it something that we can incorporate into Islam? Logic, what role does it play? Uh, Divinity, how to describe divinity, and kind of how to deal that and how to navigate those things. And these are the things that Ghazali was actually trying to navigate within his lifetime, and him as an individual. And even a lot of the books that he's written, you can see the result of many of those things in his books. I'm sorry, you were saying something, Fak?
No, you got it.
Okay. So that's why you'll find that he presents some of the things the way that he does, and this is why he spends so much time talking about the spirit and because these are all Hellenistic concepts too, right? So the Greeks, they spoke about these things, and because they spoke about them, he, from an Islamic standpoint, he felt that obligated that he needs to speak about these things too, and kind of clarify, okay, hey, listen, this is how some people define it, but Islamically, this is what it actually is.
So, Sheikh, I have a question out of the matter.
Sure.
Is what is the methodology of reading? Because we read, but
Yes.
different people get different insight from the reading.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is the best way that has helped you through years that you can share with us, inshallah?
Okay. Usually, I read with questions in mind. So if I know that there's a chapter heading and I know that there's something that he's going to talk about in that chapter, I try to create questions mentally and see if he's going to answer those questions as I read. Because if I already have those questions in mind, then when I find those answers, it kind of helps me realize and stick what it is that I go. Or another thing that I like doing is as I'm reading, asking along the way, like, okay, why is he talking about this? But again, engaging with the text is something that's really important, and this isn't limited to Ghazali, right? This is anything that we read and anything that we deal with in our lives. The only added layer I would add, like for example, when we're reading with the Quran, is I think it's very healthy to do it with the Quran too, right? Just question things. Okay, why is Allah mentioning this here? What did I learn from this? What did I benefit from that? Right. So the level of engagement of the Quran is going to be a little bit higher. But when it comes to engaging with the author, I think just having questions in mind, like, okay, I know he's going to talk about this. What is the purpose of this? Why is he talking about this? What is he trying to tell me? What is he saying here? Okay, everything I just read, how is it connected, to the chapter heading? Where is he going with this? And I think, just kind of questioning those things. Okay, why did he mention this here? What does this have to do with the topic at hand? I think those really help me, right? Those really help me when I'm trying to engage the text.
Mm.
And sometimes you won't find the answer, right? Sometimes for as amazing, as great a scholar as Ghazali was, he's not going to have the answer to everything, and there are some things that you'll find he just kind of brushes over. Either because he knows it or he feels everybody knows it and he kind of takes it for granted, or maybe he genuinely didn't know and he just kind of skips over it and he moves on.
Barakallah fikum, Sheikh.
Think about it. Any other questions? Nazim, you're more than welcome to ask questions. You're good.
No, thanks.
Jazakallah khair.
So, Sheikh, so when we die, right? Again, so the thing that actually comes out of our ruh is the ruh here.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
So, but as far as Ghazali is concerned, he feels that these are all the same thing. So he feels the nafs, the qalb, they're all ibara, or they're all expressions of the same entity. Any other questions? So should I start preparing questions for you guys? Is that how it's going to work? Then I call on you. I think that'll be a better way. So I'll prepare some reading questions, inshallah, for next time, and I want to hear from you guys. So what I'll do is I'll try to make my presentation shorter, and then I'll ask a series of questions, and then we can kind of engage with the text, because like I said, I want to hear from you guys. This is meant to be an experience, and as we go through the Ihya, as we go through Rub al-Muhrikat, I really want us to take away from this what it is that Ghazali wants to take away from, what he wants us to take away from this. How, by telling us all these things, how are we actually going to purify our hearts? Right. So over here, he's still in the description phase, right? And that's something that's really important. There's no way for us to purify our hearts until we actually understand what our hearts are. So this is a great first step, obviously, but inshallah, when we get to that point, when we start talking about how we purify our hearts, how we remove arrogance, how we remove pride, I think it's very important to understand for us, like, okay, where are we removing it from? And inshallah, when we get to that point, the connection will become much clearer. Otherwise, if we don't have any other questions, inshallah, I'll if you guys aren't already in the group, the WhatsApp group, please try to add yourselves, and I will try to give questions, inshallah, for you guys to help prepare you for next week. Sound good?
Any aided reading for, what was the reading for next week?
Reading for next week is just chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
Right. I don't think we have any more questions. If you guys are shy to speak, you can always type the questions, and I look in the chat too. But until then, if you have any questions until then, you're more than welcome to share them in the group, or you can ask them next time. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqi nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam wa jazakumullahu khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam.